Hello, and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight, we have guest remote viewer psychic medium Gail Hayssen. But before I introduce her, Raised by Giants is on Rokfin. Go over there, set up a free account, and get all of my content and all the other creators' content, and sign up for a Rokfin Premium, which is far less than a YouTube Premium account, and you'll get all of my premium content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the links in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform Rokfin. Also, if you would like to make a donation to help the channel grow and produce more content, you can donate on PayPal or buy me a coffee to help support my work. It is 100% completely optional and is unfortunately the only alternative other than monetizing. And we know what happens to channels like this when monetization gets involved. And I want to keep this channel. I like being here. So if you can donate, I'd very much appreciate it. No donation is too small. And thanks to everyone that's donated so far. I appreciate all of you so much for your kind and generous donations. Check the link in the description for donation options. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, Gail Hayssen. Gail has had paranormal experiences since she was a teenager. Gail attended the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, appears in the Woodstock documentary, and is featured in the recent book, 50 Years of Peace and Music. Today, in the research community, Gail is known to be a telepath, psychic, remote viewer, and someone who accurately sees distant or future events. For decades, Gail has been a subject and contributor to sciences in the paranormal and Psi-Research field. She has led an unconventional life and found herself accepted into other cultures by just being herself. Hello, Gail, and welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I always feel so weird when I hear that bio and think, could that be me? I can tell you my husband helped me write that.
Well, I'm really excited to speak with you here today. You have an incredible journey of paranormal experiences, psychic phenomena, mediumship, and prophetic dreams, shamanic initiations, and remote viewing. And you could say you were sort of a pioneer a little bit when it comes to the remote viewing. You were with some of the OGs, Russell Targ and Dean. So since it's your first time on the show, how did all of this kind of start for you, Gail?
Well, it all started in, if we're discussing remote viewing in Russell, it started in 1998 in Palo Alto, California. And Russell and Dean were heading up a project in a company that was a research and development founded and owned by Paul Allen. And it was to study, the project they were working on was called the Phenom Project. And this project was doing different precognitive, different experiments in remote viewing, different presentiment. There's many, many different experiments that were under that name of the Phenom. And Interval Research was a research place that you couldn't go into and just walk in and say, hi, I'm here. You had to go through, get a little piece of paper and somebody walked you into wherever you were going to be. And so they only wanted people that could be in their experiments that work there at the company. Well, my husband happened to work at this company. He was doing computer science research for them. And when he saw the memo that said we need volunteers for this Phenom project, he volunteered me, even though I don't work at Interval, and to see if they could take in an outsider since I was married to somebody that worked there. And so they asked me to come in for an interview, and I said I could do that. And they said I had our youngest daughter was young at that time, about 2 years old. And so I said I could work with them if they liked, but that I'm up here in Sebastopol. So they said, come down, have an interview. And we were supposed to be an hour interview, and it went on for about 2.5 hours because they asked me to bring in my psychic stories. And I had never thought about my life being psychic stories, and I'd never written them down or even thought of it that way. It's just the way that I live. So when they asked me to do that, it was like, wow, nobody's ever asked me to do that before. So it took a bit of my niece sitting at a computer for me, and she would type in every story that would come out of me as I could start to remember ones. So after 10 pages of stories, we said that's got to be enough for an hour interview. And when I went in with the interview and I read the stories I had, as I told them, I was remembering more and more stories. So it went on for about 2.5 hours. And at the end of the interview, Dean took me to the side and said, we would like to work with you. And Russell took me to the side and said, here's my new book, and we would like to work with you. And so that started this new little volunteer thing where I would drive to Palo Alto once a week on a Tuesday. And my husband, we had a house in Palo Alto and a house up here so that he could commute because his job was in Palo Alto. And I would come there on a Tuesday at 1:00, and we would have a remote viewing. Well, maybe it was earlier. We'd do 2 remote viewings on a Tuesday, and we'd have one, I think, in the morning. Then we'd go have lunch. Then we'd come back and do another remote viewing. And
were these this project that you were involved with Russell Targ, was this a government funded project, or was it an independently funded project?
This was all done at Interval Research, which was funded by Paul Allen, who was, one of the richest men in the world at the time. And it was, I'm not sure, it wasn't like considered all remote viewing. What we were doing here was I think it's called precognitive remote viewing, because I had never even heard of the word remote viewing when they took me into their office and interviewed me. After that, it was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And then I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we want you to just tell us, we want you to describe a picture. And Russell, by the way, for anyone listening here, is one of the finest guides through a remote viewing that I have ever worked with. And for whatever reason, he does something that makes you feel completely relaxed to just do the task. And it just happens with him and I very beautifully. And I want to talk a little bit about that after, because we still do this today together. So we started in 1998. We're doing it still in 2022. So I was given a piece of paper and a pencil, and I can't draw anything but stick figures, really, really kindergarten level art. And I would have to draw what I was going to be shown in 2 hours. Nobody ever asked me to do this before. I'd never been trained as a remote viewer, but I would draw and scribble, I'd have to tell them what it was because you couldn't tell that was a bridge, or and I'd take a little arrow and say, this is a mountain, or this is a bridge. And we did 20 sessions of this. And in one of the beginning sessions, I didn't realize what a compliment it was, because I didn't know who all these people were in the remote viewing. Because as I said, I knew nothing about it. And Russell had said to me, your attention to detail is as good as a remote viewer, Pat Price. And I didn't know who Pat Price was. Of course, now that I've seen so many lectures of Russell, he said I could probably give his lectures for him. Yeah. I found out he was a retired police officer who was the most amazing remote viewer that helped work on the case to discover where Patty Hearst was and who the people were that had abducted her, and the vehicle. I think he even read the license plate number. I can't remember, but it's in the Russell's movie Third Eye Spies, and it's in
Pat Price being one of the most authentic and real psychics and remote viewers probably ever.
Right. So for him to compare me to that on one of our first sessions, I was like, I didn't know who Pat Price was. So I said, okay, Now years later, I say, oh my God, I should have said something, Anyhow, so we did the 20 sessions, and I have to tell you a funny story about it, because this is how I met, God, what's his name? I'm spacing out the second. He did the judging, Ed May. And Ed May he was part of this whole thing that we were doing, whatever statistics they were gathering from me doing these 20 sessions. And he judged my work. And one of the things that disturbed me during the 20 sessions is that I would say to them things like, oh, there were people right here in this picture, or there were boats and cars over here. And then there was, I was like, where are the people that I saw? So all the pictures would come out and there would be no cars, boats, or people in them. And I was like, I was sure they were there, but it would say that I was wrong, that there was nothing in that picture. Well, it turned out that Ed May I think it was him, had erased out of the photos those things because they found them something to do with the remote viewing. I don't know if it was distracting or I don't know what the reasoning was, but there was some reason to remove them from the photo. So I was blown away that I was saying things that weren't even in the picture that I was being shown, but they had actually been there in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of the story of Ingo Swan remote viewing that cabin in West Virginia, and then finding that advanced military base that absolutely no one knows about that was just right over the hill. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with that story. Yeah.
Yes, and I had the pleasure of Russell taking me to Ingo Swan's house and meeting him and seeing his amazing, celestial or solar paintings. I don't know what to call them, but they were massive, huge, amazing pieces. And him and I connecting and becoming friends. And
what's he like? Tell us a bit about what Ingo Swan was like. Because he's probably in the top 3 remote viewers, psychics.
And he was, I guess, not saying this in any negative way, but he was a prima donna. He was somebody who was that, he knew what his abilities, how amazing and rare that they were. And the first day that I met him, we had this very unpleasant exchange because Russell didn't tell him he was bringing me to his house. And he wouldn't speak to me or look at me. And I started to feel really uncomfortable. And my husband was there, and I can't remember what happened, but I broke down with some sort of a story. And after that, Ingo we were connected. And when I visited him a couple of times, I met him in his last few years of life. And him and I were walking the streets together in Manhattan because he lived in the Bowery area, and we were going to pick up some things at the store for him. So we were taking the walk, and as we were coming down the streets, and some of those New York City streets are massively wide, and people are coming at them from all different, like this and this. And as we're walking, all of a sudden somebody goes by, and I go, ooh, like this. And he just turns to me, he said, yeah, they're about to die. I mean, it was like, I'd never been with someone who was verbalizing what I was feeling on an invisible level, so it was it was just a wonderful experience. And then I had wanted to talk, I had talked to him about sex because I found that after I do remote viewing, for some reason, I'm tremendously sexually stimulated after. And nobody really wants to talk about this, but I found it fascinating. So when I told him that, he just passed me his book on sexuality. He said, here, read this. You'll find all the answers. And then as I was going to visit him another time, and I went to those New York corner florists that they have, and I was looking at, there's so many flowers to pick from. And I said, I just want to know which would be the flower for Ingo. And I picked this huge arrangement of all Gerber daisies. And when I brought it into him, he said, that's my favorite flower. And I just felt so like our connection felt so like secured to me by knowing we communicated in that level. And at that time, I ended up planting a bush here that I have to this day that I call the Ingo Swan bush, because it's my only, I didn't know I could grow those, but I can grow those daisies. They grow very fine here. So I ended up planting them, and beautiful big orange ones come up every season. And I think of Ingo when they come out.
So why did Ingo quit SRI? Because it seems like to me that he kind of quit whenever the government started, trying, getting more involved in the CIA, getting involved more in the project, and he kind of stepped out. That's what happened, right?
I don't know that history. And I think there might be different people's takes on it. I'm not sure. The only thing I know was that Russell was one of the few people that he stayed in continual contact with, where a lot of people in the program, I don't know which ones or anything like that, but he had really cut himself off from a lot of people. And that was another little part I played with Ingo that was really wonderful, is there was going to be a big gathering of an IRVA conference, the International Remote Viewing Association conference. in Austin, Texas, I think it was. And it's near where Hal Puthoff lives. And Ingo was being invited to be the guest speaker and to return to, and they wanted to honor him. And I was actually the person that called him to convince him to go, because he's always been invited to go to the IRVA conferences, but he would never attend. And I called and spoke to him and said how they want to honor you. Everyone there wants to just really applause you for what you've done and all the work from the past. And it would really be wonderful for you to be with all these people. And so he decided to attend the conference. Whether it was my call or not, we don't know. But up until then, he was not going. And I handled registration that year at IRVA. And when he came in, he blew me the biggest kiss and like a nod of thank you or something. And he had an incredible few days there being honored by everyone. And then we ended up at Hal Puthoff's house. And that was when I was first exposed to that lovely woman that's about the UFOs. She just had a book come out recently. Russell just gave it to me. The Trinity, I think it's called, Trinity. Do you know her? I'm just going to reach over to get this book.
It's I was thinking
Paola
of
Harris. Paola Harris. Anyways, her and Jacques Vallée wrote a book about UFOs. And Russell just gave me a copy of this. I think it just came out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it just came out, if it's recently or not. But I know you are interested in a lot of things about UFOs, and I think this is supposed to be an incredible book about that.
Awesome. I'll check that out. I'll put that in my notes so I can look at it. Yeah, and looking at the CIA aspect of the remote viewing and Russell really getting the declassified remote viewing CIA documents in his documentary, the Third Eye Spies. It just proves that the CIA and the government was interested in this the psi ability and remote viewing aspect of this whole thing, and that it is very real.
Not only that, but at the end of that film, my takeaway is that there's a very good possibility the CIA is still carrying on this particular protocols, but that it's unknown to the rest of us, but that there's a possibility that's still going on. That maybe that process has not ended. And by the way, I got to be in that film. I was in the original version until the CIA guy told so much information that they had to cut out a lot of extra pieces. So I ended up being in the extras. So there's a remote viewing Russell and I do together in the extras on that film. Anyhow, so I think my feeling is that that's still going on. That's what I got from it. I don't know. How did you feel at the end of it?
Well, I felt that, because if you could look into anywhere in the world, right, with just your mind, and you're able to do it, accurately, then I'd say the government would want to figure it out, because you would be, valuable intelligence source, and we know how the government works, Gail. This is kind of what I, took away with it. They don't ever release anything or declassify anything unless they've figured it out. Right. Mm-hmm. And this is what I think is also going on with the UFOs and the UAP phenomenon as well. They're finally coming out and saying, after decades of covering it up, that it's finally real now and everyone's buying it hook, line, and sinker. I think it's because it's our technology and they figured it out. And if they hadn't figured it out, they'd never come out and say it's real. So I feel like that they think that it's safe enough to declassify the documents behind the remote viewing aspect of this whole thing, that they believe that, by declassifying the documents related to the topic, that it's not a threat for anyone to really know about. And I believe that this has something to do with Pat Price, because I have a theory on the faking of his death. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. So I think that that's really what's going on, that they're not going to release any kind of information until they absolutely 100% know that it's not a threat and that they have figured it out. I mean, when you look at the B-2 stealth bomber, how long was the B-2 stealth bomber hidden in secrecy, right? For a really long time, it had one of the most highest level of secrecy behind it, but they didn't reveal it until they needed to use it. They didn't reveal it until they needed to use it in a war.
This makes me think of one of the ones that remote viewing that I believe it was Ingo, where it was a submarine that he drew and described that no one in the military could believe that that could exist because nobody had made a submarine that way before. I think it was Russia. I think it was in Russia. And he drew and reported all of what was in this completely newly designed submarine that everybody said, "Oh, that can't be true."
And then the head of the CIA didn't believe him until they found
exactly when it submerged, there it was. Yeah. I'll tell you, I have this fun. Russell and I do this. I have these three things I was going to show you if you want me to just continue a little on the remote viewing.
Yeah.
So what he does is he calls me up spontaneously. We've been doing this for years together. And during this last, 6 months or 8 months or whatever, we've done 3 of them. He calls me up on the phone and says, "Tell me what's in my hand." And so I have to tell him and describe to him what's in his hand. And then he very sweetly sends me the object so that I actually have the objects. And when he asks me to do these, I always feel like, how would I know what's in his hand? Am I going to know what's in your hand right this second, But the way he asks the question, I somehow come up with the answer. I mean, on the phone instantly. So this was the first one. He says to me, "What is this? What's in my hand?" And I say to him, "It's something you hold in your hand that's colorful, that beautiful colors are all coming up, shooting up. The most thing I could say would be like if you were to hold sparklers in your hands and you'd see the reds and the blues and the colors all flashing up." So he says, "Well, you're 99% correct." And he sends me the object. I'm going to show you the object. And this is the object. It's this, LED thing made by a computer scientist that has no purpose other than colors going up like this. That's obviously a handheld size. You can go sideways with it, but I was seeing it like this in my mind. And so that was one that we did. Then another day here, and I'm saying I've never been trained as a remote viewer, by the way, to any of your listeners. I have no training in remote viewing. I've never taken a remote viewing class. And I think the only training I could say is that when I was taught this mind dynamics methods, when I was a teenager, those were very similar to the idea of remote viewing, that you were going to look at a body that was in a distance, and then you were going to report what was medically wrong with the body. So that's a similar idea. So I think I'd already been on to that kind of idea of being able to look at a distant place and see what was happening there. So the next time he calls me up, I do this next one. And this was about a month ago. And I can't even say the name of it because I don't know, can't remember how you say tetrahedron or whatever this is. And I'll show it to you. I draw this thing and I tell him that the color is like gold or very gold or bright yellow. And that the interesting thing about it is that every piece of it is exactly the same size. And then I draw something that looks like a heart with like energy emanating out of it. And I find out that this object, it's, I guess, 20-sided or something. This is the object, and it's used in, ancient Greek and in different mythologies. This particular symbol was used in the fronts of temples, and for whatever reason, the fact of all the different sides. So this was also a very good, I was having a birthday lunch with him, and he gave me this, so I know, what do you call this when it's 20-sided?
I think it's like a dodecahedron or
something like that. So that was another one, and it was the colors I said, gold, like this. And then the last one we just did about 2 weeks ago, he called a world-class remote viewing. And I had to sort of take that in because I always have a hard time taking in the compliment from the person, but I'm learning to say just thank you and accept it. he said the thing about this one was not only did I describe it and draw the object, but there was nothing I said that was incorrect. So where in other remote viewings, you may throw in, something like that, like, oh, it's this or it's that. So you might have a couple little things, but 90% of what you wrote is correct, but there's a few items in there that are not. This, he said, there wasn't anything I said about it that was not correct. So I'll show you this one. And I had said that, I said, and I drew something that's hysterical with legs. I said, it's like legs kicking out in different directions and arms kicking out. And I said, but it's some sort of like a spiritual object. It's some sort of something that people revere or whatever I said. Anyways, here was the object. It was and I think he said it was brass also in the writing of it. It's an 8-armed Shiva dancing on the lotus base.
Yeah, the Hindu god Shiva. Yeah, that's cool.
Yes, and I drew this thing of like, with arms and legs coming out like, but I have to write. I just make lines and say, these are arms and legs, because I can't draw an arm and a leg.
So how do you think that these abilities are developed, Gail, like psychic abilities, remote viewing and such? Do you think it happens at birth, or do you think that we all kind of have these abilities, just some are more proficient with it?
That's
than
exactly
others?
what I think, what you just said, that everybody has these abilities. And I do think that they're probably more accessible and I guess accessible would be the word, when you're younger and a child. And you've just, you're just beginning life. I think that that's probably the easier accessible time, if you're given that, if you're not told as a child that when the child says they see something in a room, or they feel that there's a presence of a grandma, or they say, oh, grandma was just here, but the person says, no, grandma's dead, she wasn't just here. Well, that child might have experienced the spirit of the grandma right then, but then they just got told that's not real. So there's things that happen during childhood in religion and in homes where if they don't understand it, they would rather say it's not there, or it's not real what the child's happening, or the child's just making it up, or the child has imaginary friends. I'm sure that we do have imaginary friends, but there's also sometimes that they might actually be connecting to a spirit of a family person that is deceased. So I think one of the things is like letting yourself just be open to any possibilities. Like, I didn't believe in spoon bending, and I just figured, well, maybe it's real, but I think it's probably a trick. But then when I went to a spoon bending class, and I took this fork and twirled it around twice and bent all the tongues, and everything just turned to liquid. And I didn't know that you could really do this. But then when I tried it, I realized you can do this, and other people can do this. But there are some people, like this woman, she's going to be on one of my shows on my podcast coming up. I was just on her show. She can bend spoon and fork after spoon. She can just talk to you, and the spoon is starting to bend. So there are people, I'm just using this as an example. I'm not a bender. I did this, and I'm very proud of my fork, and I know that you can do this. I have some spoons and forks she sent me because I'm going to see what I can do with bending again, but it doesn't come easy for me. It isn't like a natural thing like that. She can do hundreds of spoons and forks, this woman, and she didn't even know that. 6 years ago, she went to something, found out about spoon bending, tried it, and she has like a talent for it. But she didn't know that all her life, and she's in her 60s. All of a sudden, she's bending silverware. So I just, I think that any of these things, it's never too late to see what you can develop in yourself, working with yourself or other people, or, just listening to your inner voice. That's really a connection to me, to your higher self, or whatever the word you want to use. And some people don't like to follow that. They hear the little inner voice, and the more you don't follow it, the voice sort of gets quieter, unless it's going to be something horrendous, like they don't want you to go that way because they know something bad's going to happen to you. You may hear something in your head saying, take a left here, So when you don't listen, I think it gets less. And then the more that you listen, the voice gets stronger. So all people have to do is really start to honor, not just think it's, some silly little thought, but honor those voice that you know is from your inner self.
Yeah, and the reason that I bring that question up is because everyone talks about trauma, right? And the disassociative aspect of this as a child. So maybe it's not so much that people are born with access to these psychic abilities, but that they're developed through trauma. Even Ingo Swan talks about a separation of consciousness from the body whenever he was a child, getting beat up because he was gay. And not that that matters, who that he was gay, who cares? But what does matter, what I find really interesting, is the disassociative aspect of this. It seems to be a common theme in all of these governmental projects like MK Ultra, Operation Monarch, and that these abilities are somehow triggered through the trauma. Not in everyone, but almost a lot of people.
I want to say that I had worked at interval research. I'm not interval research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I volunteered for a few years and I worked there for a few years, and I helped out in the research with Dean Radin. And what I ended up being called later was Dr. Gail, because he would send me the emails, because he would get hundreds of emails, and then people who were having psychic experiences that were frightened or didn't know what was happening, he would send me the emails and I would answer these people's emails. And the situation that you're talking about trauma, is the reason that I believe my psychic developed early is from a lot of childhood trauma. And many of the people I spoke to, I don't want to say a percentage because I don't know what it is, but it seems like there were a few people that had a happy life and then had also lots of psychic things happen. But most of the time, it seems like the people have been through amazing different traumas. Another thing I've noticed in, I've had a podcast for almost a year now since we met, and I've had different women come on, different men and women, and some of the healing stories they share is that they might have had a trauma late in life, like losing a child or almost dying themselves. And that's when all of a sudden their spiritual life opens up. So it may not necessarily occur when you're a kid growing up. You may have this wonderful life and things are going good, but there could be an impact that comes into your life that's so overwhelming that some people just go through it and then that's it and that's whatever. Other people experience it and have a whole nother a path of life open up for them on a spiritual way that they had not been. I have a woman coming up at the end of August that just sent me her book. She was a federal judge for 30 years and had a loss of a child, that death of her son, and changed her whole life and became a shaman and left federal court. I mean, a federal judge is a very high position for her to change her life around, but it all happened from the trauma of the loss of a child. I haven't finished her book yet, and I'm looking forward to having questions with her. But I think that also supports the idea of what you're saying, that a lot of the times there's trauma surrounded and we disassociate, like he says, or for me, I was always jumping out of my body a lot. So I speak to some people and all they want to do is have an out of body experience. And I remember growing up and thinking, all I want to do is get in my body.
It's the opposite. And then when you think about it too, that could be a reason why in some of these projects, the use of LSD was used in hallucinogenics, and some of the more heavier governmental projects, and the use of the drug called BZ that will literally take people out of their mind, right? Maybe that was a way that they could traumatize people that maybe hadn't suffered any trauma previously, right? To try and maybe unlock their abilities. Because from my understanding, Sidney Gottlieb, I think it's Gottlieb, was involved in some of these projects. And, he was, known for using hallucinogenics in order to create remote assassins. And, was also the director of the project MK Ultra in the 50s and 60s. And from, listening to, researching Russell Gottlieb, he wanted to, use his techniques on these psychic remote viewers. I don't know if he actually did or if that program, went on, but there is some people that I've talked to about the project Stargate, where some use of some kind of LSD hallucinogenic eye drops were being used on them as children for these projects. So I don't know if I kind of find that interesting. And then I don't know if the whole LSD and hallucinogenic thing is kind of put in on there on purpose, and maybe it was never used, and then they could just be saying that that they were using LSD and these hallucinogenics to try and cover up the real thing that they were doing, because we know the government loves to cover up a bunch of stuff with nonsense.
Well, I have to say, I don't know much about any of that, but I will make an LSD comment though.
Mm.
I was taking care of a friend of mine for a little while she was in her last few months of living. And her name was Jean Millay, and she was married to, not married, but partnered to a gentleman named Daryl. And I asked her, what could I do for her? And she said she wanted to have a party to say goodbye to all her friends, instead of something afterwards where everyone gathers, but you're not there anymore. At least you're there in spirit, but your body's gone. So I said to her, absolutely. I said, invite anyone you want. I'll make food and they can all come here. And I had no idea who was coming to my house. But as one guest said, do you realize that the guests that you have produced over millions and millions and millions of hits of LSD back in the 60s when this was,
Laguna Beach?
Yes. And all these people that were coming in had walkers and, assistants and whatever. And everybody's mind was, as their bodies were deteriorating. They were in their late 80s. And, there was no question the bodies were, were going downhill. But the minds of all these people was as sharp and brilliant as can be. And anyone that I see that is doing research in consciousness and research in psychedelics, and these different kind of people they seem to have a mental capacity that's unbelievable, how many things that they do, books that they write. It doesn't matter that Russell's going to be releasing a new book. He's 88 now. He's releasing a new book this spring. So I just read it. It's a wonderful book about the masters of remote viewing. So it talks about Ingo and Pat and Hella Hamid. And, he just decided, he called me up. He said, I'm writing another book. Call me back. The book is finished. I got a publisher, 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's amazing. These people do amazing work and they don't stop. Their minds are still carrying on. So I was honored to have all these characters at our house, and to see how youthful they were and how brilliant their minds were. And, it just, to me, was a testimony that it didn't matter that, that LSD did not take anything away. It only added into their lives.
Absolutely. I guess it would depend on how the LSD is being used and what your environment is like. I mean, if you're under a strict, governmental facility and you take LSD, you're going to be, tripping out of your head.
Netflix has just released, I think it's 5 episodes, and they're 1 hour each. And it's the history of LSD. It starts off with the history. It's from a book that was just written, How to Get Your Mind Back, or How to Find Your Mind. I just watched the first episode. It's really very incredibly done. It has interviews with Timothy Leary, he happened to be a very good friend of my husband's. And so I always get to know these people in their last few years of life. Death has always been my specialty, and that seems to be when I come into these people's life. So
better late than never.
Better late than never. I loved here. I have a picture of Timothy. This is the day I met Timothy Leary. Let's see with the crazy light. I don't know if you can see.
I can see
because of the light.
Yeah.
But anyways, you can see Timothy there on the side.
Yeah.
That was the day that he found out the diagnosis from his doctor that his cancer was incurable and that he would not, that he'd have, just a couple years left to live. And that was the day that I met him, like a few hours after that. And we went back to his house, and he was just the most gracious guest. And he was making us little appetizers, and we sat together, and he was rubbing my thighs for whatever reason. And he just, for whatever reason, he wanted to tell us his whole prison stories. And we listened to all the different stories of when he was in prison and what had happened. And he said, in prison, you could get any drug you wanted. He said, I could get anything. He said, but you could never get alcohol. He said, I couldn't understand why you could get, any drug you wanted, and they were doing them and taking them. He said, but alcohol you couldn't. So he said one day he decided he'd make his own alcohol, after at night when, they'd go to the commissary, whatever he would do, he would somehow make this alcohol.
Ferment fruits and hooch. They
Right.
call it hooch. Yeah.
And so he shared it with his fellow inmates. And by the evening, violence broke out. And he said he realized why. He said, alcohol is a Republican drug, he said to me. And he said, and this had turned them into angry and violent people. And he said, where the other drugs did not do that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why they call it, spirits, alcohol, spirits, because it's like you're being possessed. You
Yes.
become angry and hateful. We probably got about 15 minutes left. And before I let you go, I want to get on a couple of different topics here. I want to get in a little bit about your shamanic experiences too, and your can't even speak right now, shamanic initiations in Mexico. But before we wrap up the remote viewing aspect of this, from my understanding, you were involved in a project that was remote viewing the future. And
I have that here on my little list that I wanted to mention that to you. So for anyone who wants to know about that, if you go to New Thinking Aloud, Jeffrey Mishlove just interviewed, I think it's 2 weeks ago, maybe it's a month, I'm not exact, but it'll be there in his list. And he interviews Stephen Schwartz, and he speaks about what the results and things are and what the experiment was about, because it's the second time they remote viewed into 2025 or 30, I think, a few years ago. And this one was 2060. And I feel kind of privileged, but it's not really a privilege. They look for remote viewers to participate in these experiments. And it was the most fascinating remote viewing I'd ever done, because nobody ever asked me to look into 2060. I'm dead. There's no way I'm alive in 2060. I'm 67 years old now. So what, 2060? What? I'm just saying there's no way.
You could live that long, Gail. Don't hold yourself back like that. You could be 120 years old. So they might have life extension technology by then.
Oh God,
you'll still be
I think it's enough already. So I can't exactly explain where I go when I remote view, but I can't explain it, but it's like I'm watching a movie. That's about the easiest way to say it. Because as Stephen Schwartz is asking me these different questions, images just come up and a whole scene just presents itself. And so I thought when he first asked me to do this, I figured, oh, just be a couple minutes. What could I possibly see or whatever? But they start asking you the most interesting questions, like, what's the money, or what's the cars look like, or what, so that's like details like this. And I had recorded the whole thing on my phone. And when I got a new phone, I lost the whole recording. And I really wanted to listen to it because my child will be alive in 2060. And I wanted them to hear what I said. But it had a lot to do with, it was very emotional when I did it. I had different moments where I just broke down crying I did this December 15th, 2019. And it was right before COVID ended up happening. And it was things about people not, like, I couldn't find children anywhere. When he kept telling me to to look around the world and where is their children. And when I go to cities, I wouldn't find children. And everybody seemed more like automated or something. As I mean, they were human people, but they seemed like they were machine-like more than people-like. But not that they were machines, they were people. But when I went into like vast lands where there was snow and I remember Stephen saying to me, "Why are you seeing snow?" I said, "It's December." It was snowing in this place in the world. And that was where I saw like families and children and people gathered together, but it wasn't in cities. It was all in, very more remote, rural kind of places. And when I looked at cars, and now I see them in all these sci-fi movies, but that's not where my images had come from at the time. All the vehicles were quiet and everyone looked the same. And they were shaped, I made a drawing, they were shaped kind of like triangular, sort of like that. And they had very soft rubber wheels. And it was a very quiet thing, but it sort of floated above. It didn't actually hit the ground when they were when they were driving. And when they asked about money, all I saw was this like card, a plastic card with lights in it. And it had special lights. And all these things I said now I'm seeing is coming out in technology. There is things like this coming out, but I'm not Miss Tech that I knew about these things. So I wasn't like hearing it and then re-saying it. I was just seeing later that the things I said are things that people are talking about in the future. And when I described the cars, I said, oh, it's sort of like a school of fish. And that's how traffic is. It's not like, it's like everyone goes this way and everybody goes this way. It's not like, discombobulated traffic everywhere. It's very orderly. And I didn't see a lot of plants and vegetation and things like this that I wanted to see. I talked for an hour, so there's an hour's worth of information that I can't tell you because I don't remember all of what I said at that time, and I didn't get to rehear the interview because I thought, oh, I'll have it on my phone. I'll listen to it one day, not knowing that I'd lose it off my phone. So Stephen said he'll send it to me, but he's very busy, so I don't think he's had any time to do that. And he's done thousands of these. It's just that I found it fascinating. It moved me emotionally, and it made me feel there was still hope in things in the future, but it also made me feel like cities were like not the place to be.
And that's what has been speculated by a lot of people in this community, that there's going to be a split of society. And that, without going into very many details, that's the way that it's kind of going to be, that the family is going to kind of, the family unit is going to be on the countryside, living outside of this control system that they got going on in the bigger cities and the smart cities, or whatever you want to call them. That's what's been talked about for a really long time. So it lays credence to you seeing that. Now, did you see any families or anyone set up not in anywhere that was cold, if you could remember, or was it like?
Well, it was when I was, it's kind of an interesting thing when you're remote viewing the world and all of a sudden you're going and it's like, all of a sudden it's like another vast scene would just open up in front of me. And it just seemed like places of nature was where there was families. It just, that was all that it felt like. And that there was still like an aliveness, you know what I mean? Where in the city, it just felt like everybody was a worker bee and everybody was just doing their job and going to their job and coming home from their job, that just seemed monotonous or something.
Yeah, and
but
that's
it seemed
really
like there was
interesting.
life in the other places. But I couldn't tell you if I was in Iceland or where, I don't know where the images were popping up from, specifically what country or where that was.
It's interesting about the cards too, because we have all the talk about a digital ID, and Canada is actually implementing a digital ID right now for people. They want everyone on one singular card where everything is held, your identification, your money, your health pass, and all that. So that sounds really reminiscent of really what they're trying to push. I'm glad that you did it, and I'm glad that you can speak about what you know, and that's really fascinating. And I wish
It
we
was
could,
definitely no
wish
money.
we, yeah, no physical money, no
No
physical
money.
money. Yeah, yeah, it's
Uh,
going to be a digital backed currency, is what people are saying that it's going to be. I mean, obviously, we really don't know what the future holds. Timelines can change all the time. We're in an ever evolving, ever changing universe, but that's a really interesting perspective and what you've seen. And I wish we could hear the full interview, the full hour. Maybe one day he'll get
Maybe
it
I'll
to you.
get it from Stephen. I was wondering if I could just tell your listeners that I have, I've been a podcast person for the last 11 months, I think, or 10 months. I started in September, and I never thought that I'd ever do a podcast. I didn't even know why I was doing it, because I thought I was going to promote my book. And instead, it's turned into this experience of meeting all these wonderful people and having all these healings, and me doing this sort of sharing of stories that heal with people. So if any of your listeners are interested, some of the people we talked about today, Russell, Dean, they've been my guests on my podcast. They're welcome to check it out, or check out my website, or whatever they are interested in.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. If you'd had just maybe like 6 more minutes, I wanted to speak a little bit on your healing journey with the indigenous tribes of Mexico. Just some of the spontaneous healings that you've been involved in, really quick.
Well, in 2011, I was initiated into a Mongolian shamanism as a Buryat shaman. And I just recently in May had a group of Mongolians come here and do ceremony under my tree, and ceremonies for the fire, ceremonies for the earth, and for the wild birds and for the animals. And doing ceremony has not really happened much here at my home during COVID. And having them come back and do the ceremony again really filled me with a food that I can't explain the kind of food it is, spiritual food, and reminded me how much importance it is that for me, I need to do ceremonies and honor the nature that's around us where we live, because then it also connects us into who we are in ourselves. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of people during COVID, is that a lot of them have been kept inside and haven't been able to be out as much as they should have. And you lose touch with nature. And it's important to see a sunset, or it's important to feel the wind and really feel how wonderful this is. And those things become special instead of thinking of it as an ordinary rock, or, so shamanism teaches you about honoring all these things of nature and of working with the spirits of nature. I initially started out being involved with the Huichol Indians in the mountains of Mexico in the late 80s, and did numerous different shamanic healings with them. I myself never had a goal of becoming a shaman. That was not on my list here, but it happened because a Mongolian shaman came here and said that I had a lot of spirits around me and that I needed to become initiated into shamanism and to be a shaman. I was very grateful that she did this, because it gave me like a coat to protect myself in when I do the kinds of things I do with people. And I don't necessarily like to call them healings. I call them sort of blessings. I feel like healing is such a big word and people just use it all the time for, you know what I mean? And so I don't know exactly how to say it, because often a healing isn't necessarily like, a person may not be feeling well, but that's not what you actually heal. You might be healing something in the invisible for them. And that's where the healing starts. But you may say, oh, but they still have a fever, or they still, and that's we're talking about healing on an invisible level and healing with spirit and nature. And
energetic healing.
yes.
Energy healing.
And I'm researching something right now, a device from one of my guests that was a frequency. It's a device that alters the frequencies in your home. And it's a very subtle thing, and I'm finding it very fascinating. I've only had it here for about a week, but my harmonious and relaxed nature, where my husband just went through a hip replacement a week ago. So I've been taking care of him, and he's went through a lot. And I found that after I put this little device on before we started, when he came home from the hospital, because I'd just gotten it. And we had a very, very pleasant, it was the first, I wasn't scared about everything he went through. It was the most calmest I've ever been. So there's something about frequencies and things that are invisible out there that are affecting us in ways that I'm not a scientist or can be able to speak about. But I think in shamanism, it's all being connected with frequencies and things of the land, of the sun, of nature, and all those things have frequencies. And in shamanism, you're using the tools to work with those. I have two different cultures that I've worked with, which is the Huichols of Mexico, and I'm still involved with them, and it's been since the 80s, and the people and shamans of Mongolia, who I've been involved with since 2006, or 2005 when we met. So these are ongoing long-term relationships, and I feel more like I have family that are Mongolian people that are friends, but it feels like more like family, and exactly with my Huichol family and friends, because we're going on a many, many years relationships where we've been together with each other through deaths and births of family members, where we've helped supported each other in different things that have happened in our lives. I've had experiences. I have one particular Huichol friend where we've dreamed together, where we've been able to have the same dream the same night. And in the old days, in the 80s and 90s, I only communicated to my friends telepathically in the mountains of Mexico. There were no cell phones. Now, and they'd get down to a phone and they'd call and they'd say, I know you wanted to call, and we'd have our conversation and we'd have a great connection. Now everybody has cell phones. Nobody's using telepathy anymore.
Yeah,
I just can't believe it to see. I feel so fortunate because I got to go there before it changed so much, before technology and, all kinds of people and things came in to affect everybody's life differently. And so I'm glad to get to these places. Same thing in Mongolia. There was a tremendous amount of money got flooded in there because it turned out that there was so much minerals and things that had never been tapped in by the Mongolian people. So countries came and paid money and excavated all these things. And all of a sudden, Mongolians were driving Hummers. When I was there the first time, there were no Hummers there. There were no Gucci bags. I mean, I'm just saying. In the Huichol, there was no cell phone. There was, it was a whole different ball game. So I'm grateful for that. I really feel grateful to have been able to be with these both two cultures and still be involved and feel it's my family in both sides. And, I'll do anything for them. My doors are always open. Anyone can always come and stay here from their families.
And I'm sure that also helped you out with the remote viewing aspect of it too, teaching you, how to be grounded and how to be protected. And
I have to say, you're exactly right. Again, you're so right on your observings. That one, the one that I did with the 8-arm Shiva that Russell said was a world-class remote viewing, I did that 2 days after that shaman ceremony here. And that was the one where he said there was not one thing I said incorrect in it. And I said to him, I think this must have to do with the ceremonies I just did 2 days ago, because I think it opened me up more to be able to see more.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gail. I really appreciate you coming on. I really much enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you would like to plug your website and where people can listen to your podcast on, that would be great.
Okay, my podcast is A Small Medium at Large with Gail Hayssen, Hayssen, and my website is asmallmediumatlarge.co. And if you go to that, you'll see all the shows we've done and all the shows we've been on. So it's a good place to go also. And I would love to get some more subscribers. I have 900 now, and my goal is 1,000 by September 1st. So anyone who wants to subscribe right now. And I have no particular reason. I'm not looking for, support or money or anything like that. I'm not sponsoring anyone. I just wanted to make 1,000 by September 1.
Well, you guys hear that? Let's get the Gail to 1,000 subscribers by September. I think that that's very, very doable. It's important to set goals. That's the way that I done it too. I was like, okay, I'm going to get to 1,000, and then after 1,000, I was like, I get to 2,000, and then so on. So,
and any of your listeners there, my next show coming up in the beginning of August is going to be a really heartwarming, a lot of talk about spirituality with 84-year-old Tommy Chong of the Cheech and Chong. And I think it's going to be a very lovely episode.
Yes, the links to Gail's information will be in the description of this video. I would also like to get Russell on if he would be willing to come on and have a discussion, Russell Targ. But for everyone else, thanks so much for listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. Link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there. Hit the follow button there for my premium content. And you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or Google Podcast, and download them individually to your device for free on Spreaker.com. Again, thank you so much, Gail, for coming on and sharing your knowledge and with me and my audience. Love to have you back on sometime.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. I really was happy to come on.
Thank you. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.